providers meet, and then you know who to call when you have a problem. So this is like extremely useful when you need to get something done very quickly, because you can pick up the phone and you've met the person.
Okay.
And so that's really been the way you see. There's been a lot of effort put in by DHS on information standards, right? So you have Stig's Taxi, now you're going to have Tactic Provider, which is really trying to help by making it easier to transfer information. You know, the problem is, like, there's always new standards coming. You can't ever get people to agree on standards. So at the end of the day, you have to support bucket loads of standards, literally, to digest the data. So there's been a big effort on the standards, but it really hasn't been operationalized. And I think that's where we really need to go, is we need to get more automation. But we, can't survive without the personal face-to-face context.
I'd like to also add that gap of communication is also sector specific, right? Because with law enforcement cooperation or intelligence cooperation, I think there are robust avenues of communication between the United States, the European Union, and the member states as well. So, for example, the FBI has legal attaché offices, but to David's point, that it's all personal relationship based. You can't just go. It's not the institution that moves the process forward, it's the people that are working together that build on the trust that they establish to help aid in combating cybercrime.
And adding on that, I would say that initiatives such as international competitions are so important just to build those relationships. And one example is Cyberstorm. I know that the US is inviting international partners as well to just get that personal contact. And in Europe we have Cyber Europe, which is a pan-European cybersecurity exercise, cyber privacy exercise, also being conducted at different levels, because it's not only horizontal coordination and communication which is a problem, but also vertical. So communication between technical, operational and strategic levels is very difficult, and it's especially important in the cyber crisis, of course. So I think it's important to just have exercises that include both, and to get as many involved actors as possible. Of course, that when you try to include everyone, it's very hard to have development in the exercise, of course, because you're gonna make sure that everyone can be part of it. But I think it's just to get everyone together is a good thing.
Yeah, like both of you said, there's the institution ways to gather all the people and make sure they get contact, and there's also the informal ways where people contact each other one-on-one, and then build trust and exchange information. So it's you have two levels. You have also the vertical, and the horizontal, and less you have the formal and informal ways to communicate and share information.
Go back to the Swiss example specifically. Are there, yes, I understand that there's formal mechanisms, and that comes with its own kind of political machinations, particularly in somewhere like Switzerland, where the cantons are, correct me if I'm wrong, but the cantons are the ultimate authority in their particular region, in the literal and geographical sense. But there are other, particularly for inter-canton relationships, are there more informal relationships that could also be used as examples of best practice? And one of the questions the panel set for the panel was, are there successful instances of transatlantic cooperation? I was wondering, possibly not an example of Switzerland, but there are successful instances of inter-cantonal mechanisms.
There's the formal institution, or the police commission, or like all the cantonal police get together and change. It's not necessarily in cyber, but it's all police law enforcement stuff. You have the Cyber Landsgemeinde, which is organized once a year, where you have people who write the national strategy, who gets in touch with the contents. The contents can also exchange on among themselves, and also with the higher level of the national strategy people. So I mean, it's once a year, but you can already start to engage the relationship between people and have been discussed and build trust and share information. So these are the formal ways or the formal channels, and you have the more informal where maybe a policeman in Geneva knows another one in Vaud, and then they are, I don't know from where, they exchange, they could exchange on certain types. So they say, oh look, I have this case of cybercrime in Geneva, do you have you seen the same in Vaud?
It speaks to something that Anna mentioned about the kind of personal relationships and the importance of these kind of personal relationships. But I'm wondering, particularly when it comes to crisis response, and I'm thinking about what David Horrigan was saying day before yesterday, about the biggest problem with crisis management being one of communication. And if we're, I'd be interested in Hannah's views on this, that if we're finding that a lot of cyber incident response and management, not just crisis response, but cyber, several levels below crisis, if a lot of cyber incident response and management is predicated upon these informal channels, what does that mean if we get to a cyber crisis? If there are no formal mechanisms for that? So, I'm interested in Panel's views first, and then we'll
I think that institutionalization process is important because even if you have these informal channels of communication in the middle of a crisis, you kind of want to also have a more robust framework organizing the effort. So I think these structures are starting to mature. And one example is Microsoft's partnership with international law enforcement to take down botnets. This started off on a very informal basis, and it's matured into a very robust process that helps take down the command and control servers and other parts of that criminal infrastructure. So it's kind of like playing whack-a-mole in some respects, but at the same time, you're also increasing the costs to the threat actors. So we've seen the generation of these informal channels into more institutionalized partnerships between the public and the private sector to help disrupt criminal activity in the cyber domain.
Yes. Yeah, and I think that, for example, at the EU level, the EU is trying to provide platforms to perhaps not replace, but at least to have some kind of formal channel for information sharing, for example. The problem there is trust. And if actors do not trust the platform in itself and perhaps the rules around that platform, and that they cannot know that the information they're sharing is being protected in the correct way, informal ways of communicating will always be there instead, and they will be the channels where you communicate. So I think the issue and the challenge for the EU is to provide platforms for information sharing, for example, that all the actors can trust, and set up rules, for example, for how management, how information is managed in this platform. But then, of course, you have the problem with very different levels of cybersecurity maturity. So you cannot, like the more mature European countries cannot really trust that the less mature countries have the capability to protect the information, basically. So trust and the platform's rules and way of handling information is key.
I'm just picking up on that point of trust, actually, and I'd be interested in data. I completely agree that you're more likely to trust a person you know rather than this kind of vague institutional edifice that you don't know how it functions, how it works, and politics involved. But it's one specific person, be it a police officer in another canton who happens to be a professional family. There's trust there. And I'm interested in bringing David in again from the private sector perspective, given the mechanisms we were talking about there, how those mechanisms promote trust, but also, from another perspective, tackle the problem of mistrust or lack of trust.
So I think on that topic is in the area of, let's say, undisclosed vulnerabilities, there is a huge amount happening every day between the certs, the vendors, the software manufacturers, because somebody has found something very serious, they report it to a cert, they report it to a vendor, it's embargoed by this trusted group of people so it can be remediated. So there's a lot of stuff that the general public never sees happening every day to make the world a little bit safer place. And I come from that business where we found tons of stuff, and then you report them, and they get embargoed, and then they get released, and then you try to mitigate the damage because there's a new version of software. Maybe there's a particular outreach put in place to help people understand that you really need to do something with it. So I think the trust is being built every day. You have the botnets takedowns that have become really much more regular, so you have a lot of day-to-day stuff that doesn't ever hit the press. And I think this is the driver, is that people see that something positive happens when you work with other people. So it's not like once in a while, but it's like on their daily business, they're sharing indicators, problems, stuff's embargoed that can be fixed.
Once again, looking at the private sector leading on this particular field.
But yeah, that's what I mean, because so the private sector is big on who's finding most of the vulnerabilities. It's the private sector, because like in my company, we were in the business of finding vulnerabilities. We tested all the stuff we put in production ourselves. We found a thing in OpenSSL that we named Harpley. So we worked together with the authorities. We worked with the OpenSSL Foundation, helped mitigate that problem, and then it was embargoed a few days because a lot was happening, because a lot of stuff was happening on the internet, because obviously some people had known about it. And then it was released, and a huge outreach program was put in place to educate people what it was, how bad it was, and how to fix it. So actually fairly simple to fix. And this is, the private sector's, a lot of them are very interested in doing things because they have a direct benefit out of it. So, and the big, software and hardware manufacturers, they have big cert teams that product certs are really working on fixing or remediating things. So they're really driving this business. So without them, it would be very difficult.
Just before I open it to because we've got a few minutes for a couple of questions from the audience, but I'd like to come back to panel who convenes this panel, and I'd just like a view of mine. We talked about the topic for today was transatlantic perspectives in cyber crisis, but very quickly we moved away from the transatlantic aspect of it to look at just the cyber aspect of it, and we have representatives from Europe, from the US. That move away from a focus on the geographical divide seemed to be fairly organic in the conversation and developed. And I was wondering if you could give us a few words on whether you think that was the fact that this kind of high-level conversation moved away from geographic boundaries to more conceptual basis is part of dealing with cyber crises or cyber incidents within cyber.
I think it is because it's a global problem. It's not just a transatlantic, trans-Pacific, because a lot of it has to do with the fact that, unlike the other domains, cyber is, I can get into the PhD conceptual discussion of what cyberspace is, but at the end of the day, it is a man-made domain, and it was not invented. It was invented by government and very quickly had a commercial application that the private sector took over in its developments at the application layer of cyber. Because the private sector is in the lead and has market share across the globe, that's why I think it's just the nature of the domain and why it becomes very quickly not so much transatlantic crisis management, but a global crisis management problem in general. Does that make sense?
Yes, thank you very much. So we do have time for a couple of questions before the panel ends. Yeah, please. Please also say your name and where you're from.
Good morning, my name is Michael Dorat and I'm from the permanent mission of Bulgaria. Thank you for the very interesting panel. I think Robert asked most of the important questions. Just would like to build a little bit on that. You were talking about channels of communications, level of maturity, personal relationship, ad hoc institutional framework and so on. I have a hypothetical question. Imagine that both of you are the leaders of the European Union and both of you are the President and the Vice President of the United States. And you need to sit together and build a framework for transatlantic cyber cooperation. What would each of you do?
That was a short question.
Firstly, that cyber is too big, so you would have to divide into perhaps cybercrime prevention, societal security, and cyber defense. Just to start, we have cyber is too big. Yeah, that's probably where I would start.
On the US side, I mean, if you're talking about something that's a national emergency, what kind of thing you would have? The president is, hypothetical scenarios, you would have the president convene the National Security Council that would then convene cyber-specific staff to help coordinate the State Department, Department of Defense, Department of Homeland Security, and then bring all that together to start making the decisions on how to respond across diplomatic, economic, or military aspects of national powers. The framework that we use in the United States is called DIME, and the organizing ethos of the solution, coming to the solution about that.
I think so. Well said.
Yeah, my name is Grete Østbjerg. I'm coming from Norway, from the Norwegian University of Science and Technology. Just started on my PhD, 47 years old. I have been working both in the private sector and in the public sector. And I've been working on crisis management. And one of my topics is to sort of combining the ways of handling crisis in normal crisis with handling cyber crisis. Because as you were talking about, for instance, the healthcare sector, that's a problem. And my question to you is, what would you think is the best way of combining those two works?
Well, I'm actually writing my PhD thesis on cyber crisis management and trying to draw on all the knowledge we have of previous crises and especially transboundary crises. We see that more and more that we have transboundary sectors and transboundary crises. Yeah, I think that it's important that we do not invent the wheel again, but that we look out and see what do we have, what can we use, because we don't really have time to invent everything. We have to adapt perhaps the structures we already have and the frameworks, the legal frameworks, but we cannot invent new things to a large extent, I think.
No, time for just one more quick question before the judges go back to the second round of judging. So,
I'm Jesse from GCSP. One question, because you talked about several of these challenges that are taking place in the United States or somewhere around Europe. What is the interest and the particularity of having the cyber challenge taking place in Geneva and Switzerland? How about the importance of having a neutral space where Russians, Americans, North Koreans can meet in order to discuss these kinds of questions and issues? So what is the advantage of having an event like this taking place in Switzerland? And Geneva, of course.
I think it's quite powerful to have a neutral setting because it's all about cooperation. So in the cyber world, if you look on the company perspective, you have competitors, but you still need to cooperate with your competitors during a cyber crisis, because if you don't, that's good for the bad guys. And it's the same for governments. You need to cooperate with governments that you may not be the best friends with because there's a cyber crisis and you don't know who the actor is behind it. So you need channels, you need to be able to cooperate, you need to be able to do things. Obviously, there's been some few hiccups in like the law enforcement cooperation between some countries, and this is unfortunate, but at many levels, you need to work with many countries regardless of your like country-to-country view on it. And if you don't, you have it, it's not going to work. So I think it's important to have these neutral settings and get more technicians, working with more technicians to solve more fundamental problems so that we get more stuff fixed in the short term.
Final views on that one?
Yeah, I agree that it's important to have, so the Cyber US Air Force Cyber College fields teams to both the DC Cyber Challenge and also the Geneva one. And one of the things is the learning objective of having our students understand the differences between having a unitary actor response and then having this multi-complicated EU superstructure. But then you also have the potential for here in Geneva to bring in your North Korean teams, your Russian teams, to compete against other actors. So it would be interesting to see if the competition could evolve how the different teams would interact on stage or off stage as well.
Yeah. It'd be interesting.
It's a matter of fun.
Getting as many representatives from as many regions of the world as possible for exactly those purposes, to have these people in the room, and to have these participants in the room engaging in a challenge, engaging with each other on a bilateral basis and a multilateral basis. And it's just hugely important to be able to do that.
Because a lot of the criminals, they are totally agnostic over what country and who they're stealing from.
Yeah.
And this is a fundamental problem. It's not political, it's about the money. So, and this is a big part of cyber. It's not only part because there's a lot of other motivators and actors with other agendas. But on the criminal side, they're really, they're out there to make money. And so there's a commonality, at least on that level.
And also adding on that, our critical infrastructures are so interconnected today, we're so dependent on each other, that the cascade effects of disrupting critical infrastructures can be felt all over the world. So we're in this together, really.
It's the malware that's compromising our infrastructure in the US is going to compromise infrastructure in Switzerland, Finland, Singapore, and that's the fundamental problem. Once this stuff is loose, and this is really the argument against offensive weapons, is once this is loose, people can take it and retool it. So this is like, it's a very dangerous stone to throw in a town full of glass houses. So this is like the whole argument against proactive weaponized thing, is that you throw that rock, but somebody can pick it up and retool it, and then guess what? You have the same window in your house. So this is it's a very complicated thing. So this is why we really need this like really global understanding. And all right, we don't go after critical infrastructure, like end of sentence. Like it's just not on the table. You can have a disagreement, but we can't, as countries, start doing this. I mean, this is the conversations that many people try to have, because if we don't have that, we have a fundamental problem.
And on that positive note, I'm afraid that's all we've got time for. We do have another session to judge after this. So I'd like to thank very much the panel for organising the panel. I'd like to thank David, Sarah and Marie for taking part and offering their views. Thank you very much. I'd like to thank you all for coming as well. Thank you very much.